Okie dokie, episode 11. Let's get this shit show on the road. Welcome to today's installment of Liam Small, Abridges, A History of Newfoundland by D.W. Prowse. 20 pages at a time until the bars reopen. You know what's funny? I almost forgot to do this today. Just kidding. It plagues every waking moment of my day, so... Nice to be back. Today we're going to go through pages 200 to 220. I'm not nearly drunk enough for this. We'll see what we can do. Okay. So last going off, we briefly touched on the English smuggling. I'm going to see if I can keep this under a half hour. Last going off, we briefly touched on the English smuggling of shitty rum and other not-so-fantastic trades that involve people. For the most part, there's some of that going on, but yeah, they made some funny cracks about how bad the rum was, blah, blah, blah. So, okay, so, yeah, let's go off. We're doing that. We're talking about a little bit about New England and stuff. So by the end, we got King Charles II is on the go. Remember, he's a prick. By the end of Charles II's reign, New England was killing it so hard that we got most of our supplies and trade from them. At that point, whereas we used to get it all from England, now it's almost all coming from New England, not Old England, sorry. And you can imagine that this kind of... also Ireland was doing pretty good. Like we were importing a lot of stuff from New England, but we were also importing a bunch of stuff from Ireland. Beef, pork, a lot of wool products, because it was cheap. And apparently it was really good. Old Irish wool, I suppose, still is. Likes a wool sweater, not too bad. So all this trading with Ireland and New England kind of rubbed the West England traders, the Devonshire guys. Those arseholes who don't want us to have permanent settlers over on the island. Child and all that crowd. So this kind of rubbed them the wrong way. For instance, Irish beef, pork, and wool products were very good. They were half the price and became staples in Newfoundland life. The English traders eventually, what they did was the English would start, they would pop into places like Cork and Waterford on their way, and they would come back with a lot of provisions and what the book calls youngsters. It sounds like child trafficking, but no, it wasn't. The youngsters were young Irish men who were more than happy to get out of Ireland at the time because there was like shitty wartime. 1690 wasn't a great time to be there. I suppose they were, I don't know, man. Everyone was at war. I think the Dutch were still fucking around and stuff. Yeah, not a good time. So people were more than happy to come over and try and start a new life over here in Newfoundland, where they heard things were really prosperous. They were generally treated like shit by the English traders, but once they got here, gradually, they bonded with the planters. They came over as like servants and stuff like that. They weren't slaves, but they came over to work as servants and shit like that, do manual labor, I imagine, and but eventually they became, part of that world. They married the people's daughters. They became permanent residents of the island. Blah 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 blah. There's a quote here on page 201 that just says. Yeah, they were servants to the English who had treated them ill, blah, blah, blah. The large Irish population now resident about St. John's and the southern portion of the island is chiefly the result of the emigration to this country, which took place at the end of the 18th and the early part of the 19th century. So, there you have it. It says the 18th century to the early part of the 19th century. So I guess this is one of those instances where DW jumps forward in time before we go back in time, because we were just at Prince Charles II, and now we're in the latter half part of the 18th century, and then we're gonna go back a bit, I think, especially once we get out of this fucking chapter. They were generally treated like garbage. So now near the end of Charles II's reign, the boys from Devonshire petitioned one more time against having a governor and defenses and forts and stuff built here instead of just leaving it as a trading post. They didn't want to encourage permanent settlement because that would impact the monopoly that they basically had on the fishery here. Cool. Everybody caught up? Best kind. So they kept arguing against it, claiming that it would hurt the fishery for what fucking... Anyway. So basically, just leave us defenseless. Cool. That doesn't come back to bite us in the ass ever, or in like 10 pages. Then just a few years later. Okay, so then a few years later, so they petitioned one more time. King James, it fell on deaf ears with him basically, because he was still being bribed by that child fucking guy or whatever, to not have settlements here. He was in favor of the merchants of West England. Sure, I got myself here. Oh yeah, so then a few years later after they were petitioning, they changed their tune. They came up, they started to support the idea of there being planters and defenses and a governor and stuff. Why? Because, the French were starting to get on the go. I've got some quotes here on page, yeah, so, the French were coming, and it just says here, yeah, so this is what they changed their mind to say, oh, well, now, the planters in moderate numbers were at all times convenient for the preparation and preservation of boats, stages, and other things necessary for the fishery, but they should not exceed 1,000. Then they say that they allow no woman to land on the island, and that means should be adopted to remove those that were there. And then DW goes on to say, this is just, the governor guys were being ridiculous. Like, the guys, the merchanty trader guys, were just kind of like, no, we shouldn't. And then they were like, yeah, maybe we kind of should. And DW's just like, you guys are so full of shit and your ideas are so stupid that he says, we can hardly credit rational human beings with the production of these barbarous ordinances for the exploration of British colonies. The extirpation, sorry. Barbarous ordinances for the extirpation of British colonists, and there's still more absurd restrictions. They read more like the production of some mischievous demon, the grotesque laws for some gargantuan island or the territory of the Yahoos, rather than the sober production of English statesmen. So he's like, who the fuck are these guys? Like, what? Like, you're supposed to be statesmen and you sound like complete fucking idiots. You're supposed to be politicians. Aren't politicians supposed to be capable? I guess not. Anyway, so then that kind of happens, and not a whole lot happens for the next 8 years or so, in terms of like over the next little while, the islanders still lobby for a governor and defense and stuff, because like, hey, they're coming, and because due to the, they were still lobbying for, like, also because due to the harassment of them by the English traders, and a lot of the planters moved over with the French. You know what I mean? So they were wanting this to go, because they're like, listen, man, if you guys are gonna like fuck us over, we'll just go live around with the French people. Like, it doesn't really make a difference to us. Or they would just go straight on New England, right? So it was actually more beneficial for the English to kind of do it, right? And they were saying, hey guys, and the strongest argument for empowering the planters was the looming threat again of French invasion. Because if the French could take Newfoundland, it would be really, really bad for the English, especially in terms of New England. If the French could take Newfoundland, it would really help give them a foothold in the New World. And if they can get New England and then maybe Canada, we could be looking at a very different situation right now. It'd be really, especially New England. Oh, so also, not for the fact that it would be really bad for England and New England, it also made like a really good argument that it wouldn't cost that much. So the guys were saying like, give the planters a governor and all this stuff, because like 1% of the fish caught and stuff, like 1% of all the money could pay for the governor, the forts, the fucking artillery. It's like, it's not like we don't have the money and the capability to do it. Just fucking do it. Like, we're here, we know what we're talking about. Would you please just put up a fucking couple of forts, a few guns, and like, someone to run the place. Wouldn't be too bad. And right up until the end of Charles' reign, like, they kept lobbying, fell on deaf ears, again, bribed by child, and whatever other idiots could bend the king's ear for money or favors or shit like that. Corruption, and which is cool. So we didn't end up getting any defenses or anything like that. And that, again, it's going to come back to bite us in the ass in a few years. There's a passage on page 204 here. It says, during the latter years of Charles II's reign, there were no attacks from the French. Both nations quietly fished without disturbing each other. Like ourselves, the French had no military or naval power. Their fortresses were in ruins, and there was not a single royal soldier or sailor in any of their settlements. The parent government was busily employed in Europe, and after the first outburst of energy in 1662, where they settled Placentia, the soldiers were withdrawn and their defenses were entirely neglected. They seldom had even a convoy for their merchant ships. So now, when I talk about like the looming threat of French invasion, that was there, but that's not to say that the French currently had like a big stake in the on. There wasn't a big military power. I talk about like the planters going over and living with the French or something like that. That's not to say that the France had like a thriving metropolis in Placentia at this time. We talked about it when they first got here, and there's still lots of merchant trading and stuff going on. But you got to think of it in terms of like a military presence or like a royal presence, in terms of like starting wars or pillaging stuff. Anyway, that brings us to the end of that chapter, which brings us, of course, to another appendix. Bonus round. Appendix to chapter 8. John Downing's got a narrative. John Downing was a good guy. Remember, he was the guy that was like elected to be our defender rights. Downing's petitions. That's just the stuff he wrote. Report concerning the fishery to the colony of Newfoundland. Blah blah blah. Not going at it. Chapter 9. So chapter 9 is going to cover through the reign of King James II. So we're after Charles. King James II from 1685 to 1688 is only 3 years. Nice try. Thanks for playing. The reign of William and Mary, which is from 1688 to 1694 when Mary died. And then it's the reign of William III alone, from 1694 to 1702. So William himself was there from 1688 to 1702, which is still only like 20 years. Okay, so it's just some important dates at the beginning of the chapter here. Oh, God, stab me with a pitchfork. Okay, 1688, we had the war broke out between France and England. As soon as King William got in, he was like, haha, let's go to war. Then there was a couple other things. 1694, I already mentioned the death of Queen Mary. 1694, again, we have Holman's defeat of the French at Fairland, which we do get into in this episode. 1695, there's considerable damage done by 8 French privateers to the English settlements. In 1696, there's an unsuccessful attack on St. John's by Chevalier Nesmond, capture of St. John's by d'Iberville and de Brouillan. That's gonna be one of those names I fuck up this whole time. In November, destruction of all the settlements except Carbonear and Bonavista. In 1697, Sir John Norris and a fleet of 2,000 soldiers sent out to recover Newfoundland, found it abandoned by the French. He built forts, Treaty of Ryswick, left the French in possession of Placentia, and some other stuff. So by 1697, the whole thing was said and done. The French took it and then just fucked off. Cool. 1698, the Act of William III, appointing fishing admirals, vice admirals, and rear admirals, no alien or fish to take bait. Rooms built since 1685 that did not belong to fishing ships made property of residents, colonial brothers. It's just shit's getting back on the go by the sounds of it. So cool, I think. And then we just have one more here. By 1701, a large increase of trade with New England. And then there's continued complaints against New England transporting fishermen. I don't know if that's to or from. I don't really care that much. Okay, so those are kind of the dates. So we mentioned there. So King James II, he only reigned for about 3 years. But he did kind of maintain a treaty with the French. He was sorry, keep touching my face. Can't stop doing it. Washing my hands a lot. Not going to be able to stop touching my face completely. It's impossible. Anyway, so for 3 years, he did maintain a treaty with the French. He was pretty well, I wouldn't say he was a puppet to Louis XIV, but he was getting along. They were getting along pretty good, right? So they maintained a treaty so Louis could kind of get what he wanted. As for the island during this time of his reign, there really wasn't much going on here. Things were a little bit quiet on the island. And England the island and England were somewhat distant from each other in terms of, because of all the disputes over government and stuff like that. They were just they kind of left. There was still trade and everything going on, but and not to mention that we were still getting raided by the odd pirate or two. That was still, this whole time, pirates are still just taking stuff at will, right? So you got to remember that they're just kind of buzzing around like mosquitoes, and the mosquitoes are also mosquitoes. This was the case. They were getting raided. Everything was going. So this was the case until King William III got on the go, and then, like I said, immediately decided to start war with France. At the time, like I said, St. John's and Placentia, both of the English and French, Pepsi and Coke, they were pretty much defenseless. and more or less well in ruin. Like, there was nothing on the go. There was fuck all to defend with or against. And all of that sort of started to change when this fellow Marquis de Frontenac started governing in New France. You gotta think of New France, you think like New Brunswick area, so stuff like that. Parts of France owned at different times. They owned quite a bit of what is now the United States. And this guy, de Frontenac, he wanted to destroy the English colonies because otherwise he thought France would lose Canada to the English. So he built up Placentia and had French privateers upset the English settlements on a regular basis. He had like bigger plans, but his goal was he was just gonna fucking chip away at the colonies, because he wasn't gonna make a big war statement, or like he couldn't kind of take it or whatever. So his plan for up here was to, like I said, slowly pick away at the colonies and just small raids and just over and over again, just wear us down. So in 1692, we have this guy I mentioned, de Brouillan. I'm sticking with Brouillan. De Brouillan. He was the governor of Placentia, and he was the guy who picked up the slack and continued to harass the English with privateers up and down the shore. And this, of course, pissed off the English, so they sent over three big-ass ships with 60 guns on it, and then 2 smaller vessels to destroy Placentia, because they were like, all right, we're just going to cut the head off this dragon. And after about 6 hours of bombardment, the English were unsuccessful. So, good try. Placentia, very well-defended place, as is St. John's. Now, all this isn't to say just because the English lost that and the French were picking away. There were a few resistances by the English settlers in defending against the French. There's this guy Holman in Ferryland. Apparently, he defended the place in 1694 against what it says 2 French ships armed with 40 and 50 guns each. Apparently, Holman had heard that the French were coming to wreck the coast, so he built, in under a month, like 4 fortifications in Ferryland. Because Ferryland had been taken twice before, so he kind of, I guess, they were getting better at it, or worse. 3rd time's a charm, either way. And he armed each of those 4 with like 30 guns or so. And then there's a quote here on page 213 about it. So he gets everything armed or whatever, and this is just, it just says here that in his efforts, Holman's greatest difficulty was to keep the inhabitants to his assistance, who had gotten their arms and were making their flight to the mountains. Our mountains, I guess. The hills. To the mountains. Why do I keep stopping myself? Anyway, so Holman sent after them and let them know that if at such a time, if they deserted him, he would certainly make division of each of their fish amongst the seamen to encourage them to stand by him. And not only so, but he would burn and destroy all their houses. So upon which, seeing the defense that Captain Holman was ready to make, they did come back. Wow, surprise. I suppose they liked having a house. So they came back, and with his bravery and prudent management, they so battered the French men of war, the boats, the French men of war boats, that they were, after 5 hours of fight, ran off, leaving their anchors and cables behind them, as ye French lost 80 or 90 men, as were informed by some English prisoners who were found on board the French boats, which so discouraged them that they gave over their intended spoil, which might have ruined the whole country, there being then no more men of war to defend it. So this battle of Ferryland was pretty significant. That there's a pretty strong blow against the French. So good on you, Holman. You made it into the annals of Newfoundland history, as according to D.W. Prowse, written in 1895. What do we got here? Also, the meow meow meow. After this time, the English settlers on the island and the West English fishermen, who have been kind of butting heads about a few issues over the last couple episodes, they were sort of able to put their differences aside. They weren't so the Englishmen weren't so worried about their monopolistic interests. The settlers are kind of like, okay, we'll fucking put up with you, I guess. So they banded together in their struggle against the French. In 1696, the French attacked St. John's twice. In both cases, the English were able to defend the harbor from the French, thinking that then. So here's the fucking deal. The French attack de Baz. They attacked the French, come after St. John's Harbor twice in the same summer. So then what did we do? Thinking that kicking the French's ass twice in the same summer would be enough, Come the fall, they actually took their ships and went home. They were like, well, we don't need to defend this. No, come winter, they're not gonna try. Certainly, we beat them twice. They're not gonna come back for another kick at the cat, are they? They did. So this French guy d'Iberville comes up from New England. Pardon me. Don't got the COVID. Don't worry about it. He brought with him a pile of guys. So this guy d'Iberville, he was in New England. He brought up a bunch of his own guys and a bunch of Canadian Indians who were fighting with the French at the time against the English. So he comes up. d'Iberville comes up from New England, which he always wanted to destroy. His greater goal was always to take the whole greater continent, right? So this is kind of him part of his plan. He comes to Placentia and meets up with de Brouillan. He brought with him a pile of guys, Canadian Indians who were fighting each other, French at the time. It was d'Iberville. This is the guy who proposed the idea of taking St. John's by land. He was a thinker. Old d'Iberville is like, well, water, sure, but what if we come at him from over there? And everyone was like, say what? It was d'Iberville is the guy who came up with the idea of attacking St. John's by land. Now, de Brouillan, the governor of Placentia at the time, who d'Iberville came up to see, he was saying, like, they actually argued, they butted heads over it. He was like, no, we attacked by water or whatever, like this. He was going to go for a third water attempt. So they actually butted heads about this to the point where d'Iberville was actually ready to take his men and the Indians and stuff and go right back to France. He was just going to keep on going, like, fuck you if you don't want to do it my way. So they butted heads of this, and they settled in the middle where they decided they would do both. Which it sounds like a pretty good plan, really. So what was going to happen? They split up the crews, and they one group of guys, which was de Brouillan, the Placentia guys, went by land, and they took, I suppose, some advice from the indigenous populations there to get to the woods and take the way. So they were all kind of teamed up, being sneaky in the woods. And then d'Iberville's people, they went up the shore and just kind of like fucking raped and pillaged everything along the way up there on their way to St. John's. All past Fairland, Babels, Mobile, all Southern Shore. So they put then yada 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 yada. So we were still pretty defenseless, remember, because we thought it would be a great idea to get rid of all of our defenses. But there are stories in here. There was a really good fight put up at Petty Harbor. Petty Harbor was raided, and it was really bad. There was quite a bit of slaughtering, as I'm told. There was scalping. There was talks of women and children being hurt, and so that was pretty rough. There was an ambush, we ambushed. So the settlers, he does give credit here. The settlers actually put up, given the power of the French, that the French had and stuff, and what we actually had here, we did a pretty good job of fighting a good fight. Ultimately, though, we did surrender to the French. There was a surrender made, I think probably under the threat of being scalped, it said in there. For real. So we surrendered, but they just kept raiding and slaughtering. Which I don't think that's how a surrender works. You know what I mean? But so we surrendered, but they actually kept it up in a pretty big way. On page 217 here, it says, the barbarous treatment of Drew. Drew was this guy. He was this guy William Drew, who was tortured by the French. So they're talking about the French torturing and how vicious they were at the time. The barbarous treatment of Drew will not surprise anyone who has read the heart-rending stories of Haverhill, Seneca Falls, or other places, where the French, after joining in the solemn rites of the church the night before, crept into the villages, murdered the inhabitants, and calmly looked on whilst their Indian allies brained infants, and slaughtered children. Used brain as a verb. I don't even know what that action is. Sounds messy. Brained infants and slaughtered children. The French, in fact, encouraged the Indians in their cruelties. And listen, this isn't me shitting on indigenous populations. This isn't me shitting on the French. The English were pretty bad at a lot of times too. No one is good. It turns out everybody in history has been a fucking dick forever, apparently. Everyone is like slave trading and scalping people, and the church is just full of evil at the time, and so no one is good. So when I say people are being barbarians or whatever, being crazy, that's just how it's presented in the book. Also, stop being such a fucking baby about it. Anyway, so, and then the last point I think we have is, so then we've got this other arsehole, Baudin, who he writes a letter to, and I call this guy a letter, I call this guy an arsehole, because he writes a letter talking a bunch of shit about Newfoundland. Like just the culture, the people, like, he just drags it down to the dirt, and he says, they have not a single minister of religion in these establishments, though more than 20 of them are larger settlements than Placentia. They do not know what religion they belong to. The greater part of them, born in this country, have never received any instruction, and never make any act of religion, no more than mere savages. Drunkenness and impurity are common and public among them, even among the women. It is impossible to imagine anything more abominable than the life led by the English on these coasts. Nah. They are left altogether without the successor of religion, and are degenerated into a race almost worse than savages. Crime of the most loathsome nature is quite public among them. They endeavored even to entice our men to evil. Fuck you, buddy. We have fun. So he wasn't a fan. So he was gonna, and this guy was basically a spy. He was like a French spy who was over here and, reported back to the French what things were like, what was going on. To the point where the French, I think it was mentioned here, like, French custom was like, he even spied on like d'Iberville and de Bouillon. Like, this guy, he was reporting back to France all over the place. So we've just met this guy Baudouin. We just met Baudouin, and he didn't have very nice things to say about Newfoundland. But that is where we leave it for today. I will see you again tomorrow. Thank fucking God I got this out of the way. I can go play video games. Do push-ups. And this has been another just heartfelt installment of Liam Small Abridges, A History of Newfoundland by D.W. Prowse. 20 pages at a time. Until the bars reopen. Go get some sleep. Or go, I don't know, chip away at the last of the ice out there. Hopefully that'll be gone soon. Make that sourdough bread you've been starting for ages, and send us a picture of it or something. When do I get to see people again? Good night. Good afternoon. I don't know when I'm posting this. Fuck. All right, I'm dragging it out. Stay healthy. Stay sane. Bye.